All right, what the heck is going on, everybody? It is the day. You know what day it is. It's not Mindful Lifting Monday. It's not Technique Check Tuesday. It's certainly not White Light Wednesday. It's not Thoughtful Lifting Thursday. It is Form Check Friday. That's why you're here. That's why I'm here. And welcome to this week's episode. Now, as usual, before we get started, if anybody's interested in how to submit their videos, if you're looking to get your videos on this screen behind me and get technique advice from yours truly, here's what you're going to do. You're going to pop on over to calgarybarbell.com. You can check out our training app while you're there. But if you're looking to get your video submitted, you're going to go to this FCF submission form. Click the FCF here. If you have any other questions or inquiries, feel free to use the contact form to get a hold of us. One last little thing in this additional info and comments. If you put some information in there, you give me some context for what we're talking about with your lifts, that is going to really increase your chances of not only getting chosen, but also of getting better advice. It allows me something to go off of. So more context is generally better. Don't worry about giving me too much context. I can weed through it, I can sift through it, and we can figure it out. So what we do every episode opening is we start off with last week's video that we left off with. So we're going to look back at Gideon's bench press here. Now, Gideon is benching 170 for 3 at an RPE 8.5, he says. Now, he's 24 years old, lifts in the USAPL, and has been or is competing in his second meet right away here in November, actually. Just a push-pull, but he says his bench is a big struggle. He's got long arms, not a great arch, and struggles with leg drive. Now, Gideon says that all of this is slowly getting better, but would appreciate us taking a look for him. So let's see what we got. The first thing I like to look at is our unrack. Now, I like this feet up, butt up, or not feet up, but butt up kind of setup. Also, just real quick, we did do a video on how I've modified my setup and how I think you could modify your setup. If you're one of those people who used to put your feet up on the bench and now can't with the IPF rules, look forward to that video on Tuesday. Make sure to check that out. But getting back to this, the hips up is good. It allows us to put a lot of pressure back this way in regards to using the leg drive. Now, one thing that I often look at with leg drive is basically almost like squat depth on leg drive. And a lot of the times, if the knee is higher than the hip, it can be hard to apply leg drive. So what I might do is either widen your stance or pull your feet back a little more to try to get this knee a little bit lower than your hip. Don't ask me why it works. It just seems to be that way. So when we get that position a little bit better, it might feel a little more natural to put more oomph into the leg drive, into the setup here. Here we go. One of the reasons it might work is because if you look at the shape of things here, we have this arch here, and then we have this here. So if we apply force back this way, it's not going to be directly transferred because we're not able to have fully extended hips. Whereas if we pull the feet back and the knee is down here, we're more able to produce a sort of global extension and incorporate that hip extension a little bit into the arch, which is going to help us transfer force back. Not that we need necessarily a lot of force back, but the idea is force back is going to help us reinforce this chest up, creating that decline position for the bench press. Anyways, setup looks good. Unrack looks good. The descent, to me, here's the thing. Number one, it's a little quick, looks a little out of control. And number two, it looks like our shoulders are really coming up. We got a relatively high touch point for somebody with longer arms. Generally, we want to utilize maybe a little bit more shoulder depression, maybe a little bit more elbow tuck, and really try to min-max where we're touching, right? If we look at the curve of the chest like this, if you touch here versus here, that's potentially a full couple centimeters or 3/4 of an inch of range of motion that we're doing extra essentially by touching really high. So if you could keep a bit better shoulder depression and potentially tuck the elbows a little bit, we could get that touch maybe a tiny little bit lower, and that might feel a little better. We're going to have a bit more favorable angle of the upper arm as opposed to being out here. And probably a little bit less to fight through off the chest. So that would be the first thing I would look at there is, yeah, definitely a lower touch point, keeping the shoulders more depressed. We can see you really kind of struggle off the chest on that second rep there. But yeah, we're ending up with the elbows kind of way up behind us like so. Bring those elbows down, bring those shoulders down, and I think that'll help you get a lot more solid feeling when you're driving off the chest. Now our next lift here is from Anu, and she's doing some squats. Now I'm not sure which set I grabbed. I grabbed one of two. This is either 200 for a double or 205 for a single. Either way, it's going to be around a 9 RPE. And she says she notices that the first couple of inches, the first sort of bit of initiation out of the bottom of the squat is usually really tough. And she's wanting to work on her speed out of the bottom to try to smooth it out, right? And we can see there is this kind of almost exaggerated sticking point right out of depth. Now, ironically, this is or not ironically, but coincidentally or happily even, this is something I see quite a bit. And one of the reasons that this tends to happen is with our bracing. If we get a little bit overextended and we're trying to focus too much on extension, and if we come out of the bottom and the first thing we're trying to do is extend the back, we're not really able to drive through the trunk as well. So we see this sort of lagging, slowly picking up speed out of the bottom position. We also look at the torso angle there versus on the way down. We are seeing you essentially fight too hard to be too upright. Now we have a video on the channel specifically about this. It's called Stop Being Too Upright in Your Squat. But basically what I want you to work on here, Anu, is I want you to work on ribs down bracing a little bit more, because you can see as you initiate the squat here, we're trying to be super upright. I'm guessing there's a mirror here. Now these racks are actually great because you can take these J-cups or hooks or whatever you want to call them, put them on this side and just look out here. Don't look at yourself, because that can really throw you off and make you overly conscious of a bunch of stuff that's not necessarily going to help you. It's a lot of stimulus, a lot of like feedback in terms of what you're seeing in the mirror, but not necessarily the best feedback. And also, if you ever do compete, you're not going to have that mirror. So it's really worth it to get used to squatting without a mirror. We say that a lot on this show. But the other thing that happens when we're trying to be super upright is we end up really far forward. We don't end up getting a whole lot of hip and hamstring because we're not sitting back very far. We're very, very upright. We're using a lot of quad, which in a lot of cases is very good. But I think finding that balance is going to be one of the biggest things that's going to help you smooth out your squat. So I'm going to actually cue you a little bit more onto your heels. I'm going to cue you to try to sit back just a tiny bit more. It's going to be a slight change, but the biggest thing is pulling those ribs down, allowing that torso to tilt, and trying to maintain more of a neutral range kind of position, right? Because you can see the torso is super upright here. As we go through the squat, we get slightly more leaned over, and at the bottom we're about here, which is fine. I think this torso angle is going to work for you, but right now we're kind of like this, and I want you to be more of a straight line. I want you to try to pull the ribs down in front, try to eliminate some of this extension in the low back, try to keep your hips under you a little bit instead of out like this. And I think that's really going to clean up the bottom position, and clean up that first little bit of the squat out of the bottom and get rid of that feeling of really having to grind through the first little bit of the range of motion. I also think it's going to make your depth a little bit more consistent. I think rep 2 here, we're definitely in. Rep 1, maybe a little bit on the line. Yeah, rep 2 looks a little bit better depth-wise, but generally speaking, when people, are able to transform their brace a little bit, pull the ribs down, try to get that ribs clamped on top of the abs kind of feeling, we get that more neutral range position, we tend to get depth a little easier. So, that's going to help with, I think, a number of things. Now, Anu also asked some questions about belts and sleeves, and my recommendation, absolute number one producer of all that stuff, is going to be SBD. Check them out if you only want to buy one belt for your entire life, and they have a lot of cool colors of sleeves too, so SBD. Our next lifter here is going to be Jackson, so let's get over to that. Jackson said he got some bench press advice from us not long ago, and he widened his grip and easily surpassed his previous numbers. Imagine that. Have you tried widening your grip? Anyways, so he says he's somewhat new to sumo. His conventional is 50 pounds or more above his sumo. And he says that interestingly, his best gains in the deadlift, in his conventional deadlift, have been not really training the deadlift much, but doing more squats and good mornings and that kind of stuff. So I think what he's hoping here is that his sumo is another good way to push his conventional, and he says he's open to sticking with sumo if it surpasses his conventional. So he wants to know if there's any changes I would recommend, and let's take a look here. So I think you do a really good job pulling the slack out of the bar, honestly. I think for your body shape and proportions that this is probably a pretty great torso angle and setup in terms of bracing. I do notice you're very, very toed out. Now, there can be a couple reasons that people do this. Some people tend to be a bit more comfortable in the hips and knees with a really extreme toed out angle, but I think the drawback there, or potential issue there, is that we just end up with a really narrow sort of base of support, a really sort of narrow balancing act when it comes to keeping that bar in your center of gravity, not getting pulled forward, not falling back. So just looking at this, on sort of a surface level, which is all we've got, I would say if you can get your toes slightly, and I mean slightly, more pointed forward, I think that's going to do a lot for you balance wise. Other than that, I think your deadlift is really, really good. I think you're doing a good job, like I said, pulling the slack out of the bar. I think your torso angle is staying relatively consistent off the floor, so that to me means we're getting good knee extension. We're kind of learning to push the bar off the floor. Now we do see this upper back position change slightly rep to rep. So again, that's probably just more practice to achieve that kind of consistency than it is any specific cues, but just make sure you're trying to set your hips at the same height from rep to rep and achieve that same sort of feeling before the bar comes off the floor. So if we draw a little line around your hips there, let's see how consistent we are with the hip height. Pretty good. We're a little more forward on second rep. We're almost in line on third rep, but a little higher hips. So yeah, just some slight variations there, but slight variations are totally normal, especially when you're starting. It's nothing to obsess over. It just is, consistency is one of the things we want. And what I would advise for you is to try to find consistency in how it feels more than how it looks. If you find a cue that works in terms of pulling into tension or finding your quads or, whatever it might be, focus more on that than how the lift looks from the outside, because you can't see the lift during the lift, but you can feel it. So if you focus on the feeling, generally that's an easier, more efficient, and more lasting way to make those technical improvements. All right, now our next lifter here is going to be a gentleman named Bowman. Now, Bowman is doing some more deadlifts. Now, these are pause deadlifts, so 275 for a set of 4. This was out of 4 sets. And Bowman says he's been lifting 2 years, powerlifting for about 6 months, 16 years old, 172 pound body weight, 405 max deadlift, gave me all the stats. Now, in terms of the lift itself, Bowman thinks he's too bent over at the start, but feels fine when lifting. And he also thinks that he has tight hip flexors and slight anterior pelvic tilt, which makes his stance narrower, and is wondering if we have any advice on how to improve his start position. So we're gonna let these last reps play here. I want everybody to go down into the comments section below, give Bowman your best advice for his deadlift. Tips and tricks to fix the start position, I think is a lot of what he's looking for. So if anybody has anything like that, we're gonna leave that up to all of y'all. And I will chime in starting next week's video with Bowman's deadlift. If you like the video, hit the like, leave a comment, hit that subscribe button. It really does help the channel a lot. And make sure to check out the Calgary Barbell Training app on our website. We'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.